This is Andi Purewal for Boxing Social in association with Pursue Fitness, and I'm delighted to join for a second day in a row by Eddie Hearn. Eddie, how are you keeping?
I'm doing good. I was away on holiday, and I popped back for 2 press conferences, and I'm buggering off again tonight. So yeah, it's been good. Good few days. Obviously the AJ presser yesterday, and the big one today. Really, Billy Joe Saunders joining the team. Shock move, I think, for everybody. But when you look at it on paper and you actually think about it, the perfect move for everybody. Big signing for us, you know, one of the biggest names in British boxing. I think even a guy that you can put on a pound for pound list in terms of ability, got to prove it on paper. But world super middleweight champion, can fight a middleweight as well. And you look at our roster of fighters and the fighters that we work with across our networks, this is the only place to be. So really excited and looking forward to some fun and games up there today.
I know Billy Joe's someone who you have wanted to work with for a while. How easy was it to try and negotiate with still, or what other promoters do you think were kind of challenging you to get Billy's signature?
Well, obviously Top Rank and, you know, people like that. You know, I think Billy's been very loyal to his previous promoter, and you know, I think it got to a stage where they just couldn't deliver anymore for him, and he needed to be with a big promoter who could actually get him the big fights. And it's not easy when, you know, I've been there previously where you can't get a fighter big fights, and it's frustrating when you're not sort of on that level. Luckily we are on that level now, and we can bring in those big fights, not just in the UK but also internationally as well. So many big fights for him to make, and I feel like Billy Joe, he's the kind of fighter that when he's firing on all cylinders, you know, he may be unbeatable, but when he's not, when he's having dates fall through, when he doesn't really have a strategy, when he doesn't really have a plan, it's very easy to become demotivated. And I think a lot of his career has been like that. Now I think we've got a plan. He knows those big fights are out there for him. The good news for us is he's willing to jump into those fights. And I think it's so exciting across 2 weight classes where literally any fight is possible.
When Billy Joe and Frank Warren split, they cited in the email and the press release that one of the reasons was the fact they couldn't get those fights over the line. What types of pressures has maybe Billy Joe put on yourself and said to you immediately, like, look, I want these fights straight away, that's why I'm signing with you? Yeah,
I mean, I think obviously he wants those big fights at this stage of his career, and it's up to us to deliver those. I don't see an issue with delivering those. I don't think Billy Joe, like Demetrius Andrade, probably and like Callum Smith as well, are fighters that people don't necessarily queue up to fight. You have to make sure those fights are financially valuable to the opponent, because they're very good fighters. And so they might end up fighting each other. You know, Callum Smith, Billy Joe Saunders, it's been a fight that's been discussed. That's a great domestic fight that we're definitely going to look at. Demetrius Andrade against Billy Joe Saunders, that fight was supposed to happen previously. You know, and then you look at the other fighters, Gennady Golovkin, Canelo, Daniel Jacobs. So many opportunities across the weight classes. I really still like the Eubank rematch commercially. I think it's a great fight. I think Billy Joe schools him, but I think that the build-up, you know, the anticipation, the grudge, I like that fight. So I would be willing to make that fight next for Billy Joe Saunders. And, you know, Eubank's going around looking for opponents and stuff like that. I think John Ryder's been waiting for an eternity for a decision. If they want, they can come straight into that fight. Again, Callum Smith, Canelo, Billy Joe Saunders, Demetrius Andrade, Daniel Jacobs, all these fights open to Billy Joe Saunders. He will box end of October or early November, either in America or the UK. We'll decide that this week. And, you know, DAZN are very, very excited. Sky are very, very excited. And Billy needs to be in those big fights. I think 2020 particularly is the breakout year. I saw one of his messages this morning on Insta, which is like all or nothing kind of attitude, which is basically throw me in those fights. I know I'll win those fights and I'll come out the other end. So it's very exciting to pick up a great fighter at that stage of his career where he's ready for those mega fights.
With his first fight announcement around the corner, who are you guys considering?
A lot of people, really. I mean, there are some big fights that he would jump into straight away. Canelo doesn't have an opponent yet. That's a fight that we'll be putting forward to. You know, we've sort of been to Canelo and offered him Callum Smith and Demetrius Andrade, and now we'll do it again with Billy Joe Saunders. Gennady Golovkin has a fight in October. Daniel Jacobs is returning. Demetrius Andrade, you know, he could fight in the UK or the US as well. Will he have one of those mega fights in October, November? Possibly, but I think there's a good chance that he'll be out and then going again in February or March in a big mega fight. And, you know, again, we've got to sit down with Callum Smith. Now we've got a clear opportunity to make that fight for proper money, not the kind of tiddlywinks that was offered before, proper money. So that is a fight that I think is a great fight for British boxing. Like I said, all the other fights out there as well, and maybe bringing some of those fights to the UK as well. Billy doesn't care where he fights, you know, he's up for fighting anywhere in the world as long as he gets the big ones.
Just to touch on that previous offer from Billy Joe Saunders' team to Callum Smith to try and make that unification fight, was there a counter offer sent by yourselves?
No, because obviously there was a lot going on behind the scenes. We knew that probably Billy Joe was unhappy, he was, you know, going to be on the move, so there was no real reason to make a counter offer. Again, that was a 50-50 offer. And the offer was, you know, it's disrespectful to say it's peanuts, but in the grand scheme of things, the offer was tiny. And I think it's probably why Billy Joe, you know, on those kind of levels, needed to find himself a new promoter. So that's a fight now where I think we can generate proper money for. But again, you know, we still need to get Callum and Billy Joe firing, get their profile going, because Billy Joe's been a bit stop-start for many different reasons, and Callum's come out the back of the tournament with the World Championship and as number one super middleweight in the world, but hasn't really had the momentum or the profile that those fights should have garnered. So we need to build that fight, and I know fans don't like to hear that, but we do need to make sure that, like I said, if it's going to be the fight that I think it should be, there needs to be some kind of narrative and build to that fight over the next couple of months.
I know you was looking at September for Callum to get back out. What names again are you looking for him? I can't imagine another Hassan and Dan would necessarily go down well with the public because of how dominant a performance Callum put in against him.
Yeah, again, everything's about timing. You know, do you look to make a Billy Joe Saunders fight at the end of this year? You know, or do you look to get them defences and then make the fight in spring next year? Callum is due a mandatory as well. John Ryder was supposed to be that mandatory, but again, we're waiting on Chris Eubank's team for the last 6 weeks to decide what they're going to do on that. So, you know, I think anything's possible. We haven't really been able to say too much to teams about the Billy Joe Saunders fight. So now this is out in the public, we now go back to all those teams of people that I talked about and said, if you want to go with Billy Joe, you can go next, October, November, whenever you want. So now is going to be the interesting point where we actually find out who wants to fight Billy Joe and see what fights can be made for October, November.
Where do you foresee Billy Joe's career? Do you see it at middleweight or do you see it at super middleweight?
I think Billy can make 160. You know, he's made that clear to us. And I think one of the great things about him is he has the ability to fight in both weight classes. You know, the middleweight division financially is bigger, but he holds a belt at 168. So it's a great place to be where you've got all the fights at 168, but you have the ability to drop down to middle and have the mega fights as well. So, you know, I don't want Billy to get, not lazy, but comfortable at 168 and then unable to make 160. But at the same time, I think it's unfair to a fighter at that stage in his career to all of a sudden be jumping from one weight class to the other. But the key is big fights. We know, and we've been told, make me those big fights at 160 or 168. So wherever they may be, we will make them. I think he's a very, very good middleweight. You know, I've watched him. You know, when I watched him in the Lemieux fight, I was never so sure about Billy Joe Saunders. You know, I watched him in the Chris Eubank fight. I thought, you're a bit lazy, but you're so skillful and you're so talented. But are you really motivated? Then I watched him in the Andi Lee fight, and I thought he was brilliant. That was the fight where I watched it and thought, this guy is the real deal. Then, of course, the Lemieux performance, but everything's been two stop-start. So you need to get him firing. And if you get him firing at 160, you know, I mean, there is an argument to say he may be number one at 160. Now, people talk about Canelo, Triple G, Demetrius Andrade. I mean, Demetrius Andrade, Billy Joe Saunders, for me, was always a 50-50 matchup. Two guys that are so skillful. He won't feel like that. But he has the ability, Billy Joe, to beat any 160 out there on his day, as does Demetrius. So I feel like we've got two of the guys who may not yet have the biggest profile in the middleweight division, but certainly, I believe, are two of the top boys at 160. And obviously, Billy holds a belt at 168. So it's fascinating that you've got that opportunity to move up and down.
You mentioned Golovkin and Canelo. Canelo was recently stripped of his IBF title, and Golovkin Derevyanchenko seems set to fight for that vacant title. What was your thoughts on the fact Canelo was stripped and that fight's been made?
I don't really know what went on internally. Obviously, it looks like it was a bit of a mess. I think from a DAZN perspective, the fight they wanted to make and the fight they believed would get made was Canelo against Triple G. When that fight didn't get made, Canelo obviously made it clear he wanted to fight Kovalev. That sort of all happened a bit late, and then Kovalev fights Yard. I think now they want to fight Kovalev, and I think they'll wait till August 24th to see if Kovalev beats Yard and then try and make that fight for the end of November, early December. We actually agreed a deal with DAZN for Demetrius Andrade to fight Canelo. And the money was agreed from our end, and Canelo decided he didn't want to fight Demetrius Andrade. So, he did want to fight Derevyanchenko. We also said to Canelo that Callum Smith was available to fight in October, November. He didn't want to fight him. But you can't really knock Canelo's resume. When people say, oh, he's ducking these fights, he's not ducking. How can a guy duck fights? He's boxed. You look at his resume, even going back to Mayweather and, all these great fighters. He's boxed Golovkin twice. He boxed Daniel Jacobs last time out. This time he could be fighting Kovalev. So, you can never accuse Canelo of not taking challenges. But we have a lot of challenges left for him, and we haven't beaten him yet. I had Rocky Fielding, Daniel Jacobs. Now I want to try and beat him. And I think Demetrius Andrade and Billy Joe Saunders are two fighters that could potentially do it, as well as Callum Smith.
Just briefly mention the fight there between Kovalev and Yard. What are your thoughts on it? It's only next week now.
I think timing is everything. Kovalev is certainly not... Oh, it's a test, is
I
it?
hope it's a test.
Yeah, Kovalev is definitely not the fighter that he once was, but he's still an excellent fighter. Yard is so untested that you just don't know. But what I like about Yard and what I like about Tunde is they're almost, like, deluded's the wrong word, but they're fearless because they have this belief that they're unbeatable. And when you have that belief, you're very dangerous. But ability is something you can't fool or trick. So if they have the ability and they have the belief, which we know they have, they may well win. I just don't know how good he is. Do you understand? Like, he's never been an outstanding amateur. He's never had that pedigree. He's come from nowhere, really. So, is he actually any good? And I don't mean that disrespectfully. We just don't know because he's never boxed anyone of any significant note. He might be really good. And if he is, he'll probably beat Kovalev because he's got that belief to go to Russia with Tunde. And you're not deluded if you actually have got the goods. So we'll find out if they're deluded or not. But if they're not deluded, he's going to be really dangerous in Russia. And even with that mentality, he's going to be dangerous. We know he can fight, but what level is he? Is he British level? Is he European level? Is he world level? Nothing of the past necessarily shows you that he's good enough to beat someone like Kovalev. But when you've got that belief, that fearlessness, which he does have, I hope he does it. I like Anthony Yard. I like what he's about. I like what he represents. And I know Tunde gets a lot of stick. I like Tunde. I think he's absolutely nuts. I like him. I think he's great for the game. He's controversial. People hate him. People love him. He backs his man. They're going to Russia. They don't give a fuck. But you can't bluff skill and ability. And we don't know if he's got that skill and ability until you go into the deep end.
Now on to yesterday, as we only had a brief chat. Having looked over social media once again, the reaction to Joshua-Ruiz out in Saudi Arabia for their rematch has been a lot probably more negative than what anyone might have imagined, particularly yourself in your shoes. What's been your initial reaction to everybody else's thoughts?
We knew that there'd be controversy. Look, when we do anything or when I do anything, you've got to magnify it. It magnifies by 300 times, because you got the people out there who spend their whole life on social media. It still shocks me that when I put something out, I get 10 replies within 10 seconds. And it's like, wow, you actually sitting there waiting for me to tweet something. When Callum Smith boxed George Groves, I didn't see one tweet of criticism. And I know this fight's bigger, but that was still the final of the World Boxing Super Series and the World Super Middleweight Championship, Ring Magazine belt, two Brits fighting in Saudi Arabia. No one said a thing. So now all of a sudden, Matchroom go, Joshua goes, and I understand it's a much bigger event, but we have to live with our decision. We thought about this. It's not just we just woke up one morning and went, yeah, let's go to Saudi. Oh, everyone will be fine with that. We know there's going to be backlash. The point of yesterday was to make sure that at least people knew that certain things that are being said online from an event perspective, entry, women, visas, we could deal with that respect. The other stuff that's well over my head, I can't really give you the answers for, other than one guy who said, so I said, look, we're following WWE, European Tour, the tennis, Formula One, the World Boxing Super Series. I mean, even from a music side, David Guetta, Janet Jackson, 50 Cent. Oh, so you're hiding behind them? No, I'm just telling you that region and Saudi Arabia is a huge hub right now for live sports and entertainment events. So no country's perfect. Many countries have their problems. And I believe that Saudi Arabia are looking to make a difference for their people by creating big sports events. I've seen the reactions. I've seen the reactions at the concerts. I've seen the reactions at the sports events. But we're never going to get the blessing of everyone to go. But ultimately, the decision lies with the promoters and the fighters. And we're going.
Prior to the fight, only a matter of a week ago, AJ did an interview and he said that he wanted to bring it back to the UK. So why ultimately did, I imagine he had the final say, why did he even end up saying, let's go out to Saudi?
I think at the time we didn't know whether the deal or the offer was real or not. You only really know once the money's been paid. I think he definitely, on given everything being equal, in terms of the finances, in terms of Ruiz's wish to come to the UK, in terms of credibility of fighting outside of the UK in terms of a neutral ground, I think he would have chose Cardiff. But when he looked at the deal, when he looked at the opportunity, when we looked at Ruiz's attitude, we decided to do it in Saudi. So, yeah. I mean, Cardiff, there is another world out there outside of Cardiff. Do you know what I mean? Fight fans, I think sometimes, I know British fight fans want the fight in the UK. I understand that. We're very naive to think that there isn't another world and other opportunities for this sport outside of Cardiff. The mega fights only take place in Britain or in the US. Now that's about to change forever, because once Saudi and these other countries within that region start investing in the sport, what do you think is going to happen? Every promoter in the world has been trying to land a mega fight in Saudi, in Qatar, in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi, and I'm the first one to do it. Unfortunately, I'm going to get all the stick initially, and the others are going to bowl in, do their deals, and go, well, Eddie Hearn went there, look, he's fine. So I've got to deal with that. That's fine. That's called being a trailblazer. But don't you think now that all these promoters are going to go to all these territories and say, oh, well, look, Saudi Arabia are doing Joshua-Ruiz. Why don't you do Pacquiao Mayweather? Yeah, we'll do that. So the game is about to change. Mark my words, you'll see it. So you either embrace it and you get on that change, or you sit still and you live in your little shell, in your little world, and you just ignore other opportunities elsewhere to grow the game and grow the sport. Sometimes you have to make decisions that come with criticism. I'm accustomed to that. But I'm not going to sit back and not look at these opportunities where countries, regions are investing in the sport and willing to pay the fighters significant amounts of money. Sometimes you don't really have a say, Andy. These levels are going to be so high, you can't stop a fighter from taking this fight. My job is to provide the best commercial opportunity for fighters. So be ready for this change. And you should embrace this change, not you, or you as well. No, but Box It Social. All these sites need to understand you can't live in your little world. What do you want to do? You just want to sit there, be in your little boxing social. Do you want to grow? Do you want to think about there might be another world out there? Do you think there might be another market out there? There might be 40 million people in Saudi Arabia, 70% under the age of 24, that might just love the sport of boxing? Or do you want to just be where you are? It's up to you. I'm not that person. You might be, or not you. Well, you might be.
I understand what you're saying, Eddie. I don't necessarily agree with you saying about trying to reach out. We are obviously a growing company, as you know.
No, I'm not. But what I'm saying is, if you just see this as your little area, you know, at some point, if boxing's going to explode in the Middle East, Boxing Social should think about being a part of that. You know.
Well, having listened to your answer prior to digging out Boxing Social,
I'm not digging out Boxing Social.
I'm only joking with
everybody. I'm saying everybody. Every website, every boxing brand, every promoter, you know, there's opportunities out there in these regions to grow the sport. China's another one. Africa's another one. You know, we're in Italy. We're launched in Spain. We're going in Germany. All these territories. Every country has their problem. Saudi might have a worse track record than other countries, but they're still making a huge investment in the sport. So you either take those opportunities and look to grow, or you say, no, not for me. For us, we've said, for us, for the fighters, we're going to do it.
Prior to those comments, there was a lot of talk there about the money and the financial side. Was this a money-motivated decision then to take the fight out of Saudi Arabia? Was it the best and lucrative offer that was on the table?
It wasn't the best offer on the table, but in terms of the logistics, in terms of the fact that Saudis have done the World Boxing Super Series, done the Amir Khan fight, they've actually got an infrastructure in place for boxing. That made it a lot easier to do this deal. Anybody that thinks that fighters aren't money motivated are absolute clowns, right? Because this is a dangerous sport and every fighter wants to make as much money as possible. So yes, of course, the financials for the deal in Saudi were excellent, but they didn't trump America so badly that, you know, it was like a no-brainer. There was more to the decision than the financials. But it wasn't the biggest offer, no. But every fighter, you know, and I understand the fans, you know, this, you've got to do, you know, legacy, and it is about winning belts, it is about creating legacy. But please don't be naive enough to think that fighters don't want to make as much money as possible.
On the infrastructure side, say if a fight was in America, it was over here, you've got stuff to do in the week, in the build-up, obviously out there isn't anything. I know you touched on it in the press conference.
You're so naive.
Go on then, talk to me, Eddie. What's on in the week?
What do you think? Do you think this country doesn't exist?
No, I mean, for example, so say if it was in New York, you've got all the sightseeing, you've got places you go out of there. But in Saudi Arabia, with everything that's been going on politically, I'm sure that some fans are going to be worried about travelling out.
Wait till you see what is going to be happening around this event. There is going to be music concerts by some of the biggest stars in the world, building into the week to build this fight. There is loads to do in that area in Riyadh. Like that, this is the problem. Is people like what you just think it's like.
Okay, then, so what's to do then, Eddie?
What?
What do you know of?
There's sightseeing to do in Saudi Arabia around that area. You do your research.
I'm not saying there isn't.
I'm saying there's nothing to do in Saudi Arabia. Like, what would you do? So the answer is do your research, understand, but also understand what goes on in Diriyah season, in Riyadh season. They've got tennis, they've got music concerts non-stop, they've got all the fight beats. Like these are proper. Like, do you realise the investment in events like this? They are building their own stadium for this fight. This whole week, the build-up is going to be like nothing you've ever seen for a fight. Nothing you've ever seen. Like when they did the Formula E, do you know? I'm not like Chris. I'm saying, do your research about when they did the Formula E. Look at the events. You saw the videos yesterday. They did a David Guetta concert just as like a welcome to the fans for the Formula E. There was 70,000 people there. You know, this is the problem with people thinking, oh, fans are going to go out there. You just got to stay in your hotel room. There's nothing to do. Wait till you see the full schedule of this season that they're producing. It is mind blowing. And the investment in entertainment in sport, you can't ignore it because they've got everything. They've got every major, and it's going to continue and continue and continue. They've just announced the biggest ever horse racing festival in the sport going there. They're about to announce a huge tennis event after the Joshua fight with all the top stars. Like, it's non-stop packed with action out there. So their aim is to make this the sport and entertainment capital of the world. Don't bet against them, because they're investing more money than anybody's capable of investing.
Okay, then. But with people who are travelling out there, who may be worried because of human rights laws, etc., what are your thoughts with regards to all of that and people's concerns?
I've been multiple times. I've never had an issue. I went to the World Boxing Super Series. Everybody loved it. Again, when you see the events and the festivals that are going on around it, it's not what, it really isn't what you think. You've got to go and experience it, or watch it, or look at the build-up and look at the events happening around it. It's another world, mate. It's another world. I keep going back to those concerts that they played on the big screen yesterday. When you see that, I said to the guys at Saudi, you've got to get that out there. Did you see the fans? Like, these fans, they're massive sports fans, they're massive boxing fans, they're massive music fans, entertainment fans. There's this mindset that it's really worrying that people just think, you go there and you've just got to sit in your room and there's nothing to do and you just got to wait for the fight and then nip out your room and go to the fight. No, wait for the information.
Final thing I just want to touch on before I do let you shoot off is, you mentioned in our interview yesterday that the contracts were all referring to the fight before, the first fight, and there wasn't a second. So the contracts that were signed, those all signed before the first fight out in New York. There's been no. When you say for the second fight, I mean, obviously you won't say the dates and where everything would take place. So
we decide all that.
Will there be a second contract that needs to be signed?
No, that is the contract. That's the contract for the second fight, where we have to let them know the date and venue, which has been legally enforced.
So when you say legally enforced, what exactly has Andi Ruiz had to say about the contract, or what's lined up?
I had some questions which we had last night, more about logistics, about commission, about travel, stuff like that, which he's more than entitled to ask. But there's no, the contract, he signed the contract for the rematch. We just had to let him know where it was and when it was, which has been done. All the governing bodies have been written to by both sides to confirm the fight and the date. I see a lot of things on Twitter. Yeah, could he pull out and retire and never fight again? Yeah, of course he could. You can't make a guy fight, but if he can't have another fight, or anybody that tries to give him another fight is also in deep problems, because they're potentially affecting a breach in the contract. So there's been no discussions with his team in terms of him not fighting. Al Heyman, Tom Brown, these guys, they know their position on this fight. And by the way, he's making a lot of money for the rematch. And by the way, he probably thinks he can win. So I have no problems. They've got questions because I think there's a lot of, not naivety from their part, but a lot of naivety from people who don't realise the infrastructure for events in Saudi. So some of the things that you've said, like, they've heard, and they're like, where is it? Oh, is the hotel bad? It's probably the best hotel in the world. 7 stars. It's the greatest building in the world. And by the way, you've got the whole floor, and you've got another floor where they're going to build your own gym for 10 days before the event. And by the way, you've got 1 million cars and planes, and this is proper levels. So, but they just need to be comfortable with that.
Well, Eddie, and I've kept you for long enough, so as always, thanks for being boxing social.
Cheers, mate.
And enjoy your family holiday.
Cheers, mate.